1 week before the end of World War II in Europe, Sunday, April 29, 1945. The 45th Infantry Division of the United States 7th Army releases Dachau, the first official Nazi concentration camp. The troops smell not just human feces but also rotting carcasses. Many of them start to scream or throw up as they discover piles of almost starved dead bodies and 30,000 survivors, most of whom appear like walking skeletons. Thousands of them are sick and would die from typhus outbreaks and famine during the months after the camp was freed. Along with captives who endured years of torture and humiliation by their Nazi tormentors, the startled and enraged troops desire retribution, and the cruel answer is to come. Following Adolf Hitler's appointment Chancellor of Germany on January 30, 1933, the National Socialists instituted a dictatorship in the German Reich using a variety of terror tactics. The main goal of the first concentration camps established in the 1930s was to subjugate and threaten the leaders of political, social, and cultural forces the Nazis thought to endanger the survival of the government. The captives in the concentration camps lived in continual terror of the cruel treatment and persecution applied by the SS. Established in March 1933, Dachau, close to Munich, was one of such camps and evolved as the first Nazi concentration camp. Arriving in the camp on March 22, 1933, the first prisoner was Theodor Eicke. Dachau's commandant instituted a system of rules in October the same year whereby inmates suffered terrible penalties for the smallest transgressions. Eicke made sure every later concentration camp modeled itself on the Dachau camp. For SS guards spread around the concentration camp network, it also became a training facility or a school of violence. The camp housed 5,000 inmates throughout the first year. First mostly German communists, social democrats, trade unionists, and other political rival of the Nazi government, the internees were over time, various groups, including Jehovah's Witnesses, Roma and Sinti people, homosexuals, serial offenders, and so-called asocials, who the government imprisoned because they could not, or would not, find meaningful employment, were likewise held at Dachau. Early on, only few Jews were detained in Dachau and subsequently only generally because they belonged to one of the above groups or had served time in prison following conviction for breaching the 1935 Nuremberg laws, which established Nazi concepts about race legally. Using prisoner labor, the SS started erecting a sizable complex of structures on the site of the previous camp in early 1937. Under appalling conditions, prisoners were compelled to perform this labor beginning with the destruction of the old weapons factory. Officially finished in mid-August 1938, the camp stayed virtually unaltered until the conclusion of the war in 1945. As Jewish persecution grew, so did the number of Jewish inmates at Dachau. Almost 11,000 Jewish men were detained on November 10 to 11, 1938 during the Kristallnacht, and Nazi SA and German citizens attacked Jewish homes, shops, synagogues, hospitals, and schools. Most of the guys in this group were released following a few weeks to a few months of incarceration. Several of them had shown they had plans to emigrate from Germany. Two portions comprised the camp, the crematoria area and the camp area. There were 32 barracks in the camp area, one for medical experiments and one for clergy imprisoned for challenging the Nazi rule. At the main gatehouse, the camp administration was housed. Along with a jail block known as the bunker, the camp area had support structures housing the kitchen, laundry, showers, and workshops. By means of detention in the bunker, the SS was able to separate rebellious and defiant inmates as well as confine and expose them to more severe prison conditions outside the reach of their fellow prisoners and so inflict torture or murder upon them. Prisoners were summarily executed in the courtyard separating the central kitchen from the prison. Around the camp stood a ditch, an electrified barbed wire fence, and a wall with 7 guard towers. Living circumstances for the detainees in the Dachau concentration camp drastically deteriorated as the Second World War started on September 1, 1939. A great fatality rate resulted from the terrible labor conditions, inadequate food, and lack of hygienic amenities in the camp. From nations under German military occupation, more and more detainees were sent to the Dachau concentration camp from 1940. Built in 1942 close to the main camp was the cremation section. It comprised the modern crematorium featuring a gas chamber as well as the old one. There is no convincing proof, nevertheless, that human beings were killed in this gas chamber. Rather, inmates faced so-called selection, and those judged too sick or frail to continue working were sent to the Wartime euthanasia killing center close to Linz in Austria. The gas chambers at Wartime claimed the lives of more than 2,500 Dachau detainees. Mass shootings by gun also occurred, first in the bunker courtyard and subsequently in a specifically created SS shooting range. There were thousands of Dachau murders, including at least 4,000 Soviet prisoners of war following the 1941 invasion of the Soviet Union. German doctors started medical experiments on Dachau's inmates in 1942. High-altitude and hypothermia studies as well as tests of techniques for rendering seawater drinkable were carried out by doctors and scientists from the German Experimental Institute for Aviation and the Luftwaffe, German Air Force. These initiatives sought to assist German pilots flying bombing missions or who were down in cold seas. German researchers also conducted tests to see how well medications fight illnesses including malaria and tuberculosis. These tests claimed hundreds of captives either dead or permanently crippled. Additionally exploited as forced laborers were Dachau inmates. They worked in the camps running operations, on different building projects, and in little handcraft businesses set up within the camp. They drained marshes, worked in gravel pits, and constructed highways. All in horrible circumstances. For German munitions manufacture, forced labor employing concentration camp captives became ever more crucial during the war. Under Dachau's direction, satellite camps under the summer and fall of 1944 were set up close to armaments manufacturers all throughout southern Germany in order to boost war output. Dachau alone had about 140 subcamps, mostly in southern Bavaria where inmates worked almost entirely in arms manufacture. Thousands of them were laboring to death. The Germans started sending detainees from concentration camps near the front to stop the capture of whole camps and their occupants as Allied forces pushed on Germany. Arriving constantly in Dachau from the eastern evacuation camps, transports from there caused a marked decline in circumstances. Given around 30,000 inmates, the camp was quite packed. Built to accommodate 200 convicts, barracks were packed with more than 1,600. Often near death, the convicts arrived frail and tired after days of journey with little or no food or water. A typhus epidemic raced across Dachau, killing 100 to 200 prisoners daily due to overcrowding, bad hygienic conditions, inadequate supplies, and the deteriorated state of the inmates. Of some 41,500 people who died between 1933 and 1945, over one-third perished during the last 6 months of the conflict. The SS also started clearing Dachau concentration camp inmates at the end of April 1945 in order to stop their release by Allied forces. At least 25,000 Dachau camp system inmates were either transported away in goods trains or pushed on grueling foot marches toward Tyrol. The Germans shot everyone who could no longer continue during these so-called death marches. Many also passed from malnutrition, hypothermia, or tiredness. The process claimed several thousand dead among the detainees. Units of the 45th Infantry Division freed the main camp of the Dachau on April 29, 1945. The commander Martin Weiss of the camp had already left when the U.S. troops arrived at Dachau. Still, there were Nazi guards at the gate tower and SS guards still in the camp, even naively aiming their weapons toward the liberators. But they came down with their hands held in the air when the American troops opened fire in reply. The U.S. troops further expected the camp when the SS guards turned themselves up. None of their past military experience, though, equipped them for what was coming. The scent was the first hint things was quite different. The American soldiers discovered more than 30 railroad carriages loaded with dead in different degrees of decay as they approached the camp. That was the instant they knew where the scent came from. That was the stink of death, overwhelming. Inside the camp, they discovered even more dead bodies, often naked, lying where they had fallen in the last few hours or days before the camp was liberated. Sometimes the bodies stacked on top of one another like firewood. For many troops, witnessing these crimes gave their war fresh significance. They came to see they were against pure evil itself, not only an enemy. Before leaving Dachau, the Nazis had sought to cremate as many of these bodies as they could before. Unfortunately, there were just too many of them. Later on, one soldier recalled, "Everywhere you turn is simply the horror of bodies, and people near death or in a state of extreme depravity that you cannot even understand it." While many of the American troops broke down in sobbing, others were driven by hate, fury, and resentment. One U.S. lieutenant marched for German officials out of the woods carrying a white handkerchief into one of the corpse-filled box trains and fired a pistol. Another American officer completed the task while the mortally wounded Germans yelled out in agony. It grew worse later on as well. Lieutenant Walsh exclaimed, "Let them have it," and the U.S. soldiers started fire with rifles, pistol, and .30 caliber machine gun after the SS guards were directed to line up along the wall in the coal yard by the guard tower. The Nazi guards were dead on the scene following a 30-second frenzy of firing. Still, even this marked only the beginning. Many of the inmates, who had been tormented and considered as nothing but animals all these years, also exacted retribution. Although every prisoner had lost at least some family members, some of them had to see their spouses mistreated and raped. Others watched shooting contests in which SS members fired little toddlers from the ground up. Others watched friends die from malnutrition or on the death marches just before the liberation. Some prisoners vowed to all that was holy to them, that they would not hesitate if they could ever kill their SS guards. And they honorably honored their word. One of the convicts elbowed one or two others out of his path when they caught the SS guards. The detainees toppled the guards and slaughtered all of them. Along with sticks and shovels, the convicts battered several more SS members and capos to death with their bare fists. Another soldier saw how a prisoner was stamping on the face of an SS trooper until, as he later testified, not much remained. Some SS guards had switched their uniforms to match camp attire. Still, they were identified and killed right there. As revenge was sought, fellow inmates and American soldiers both often stood immobile, observing coldly and without pity while all this was happening. Later on, one soldier remarked, "We stepped aside and watched while these guards were beaten to death, tortured so violently that their bodies were ripped open and innards out. We watched less emotionally than if a dog were being punished. Actually, one could say that we lacked sensation entirely. Hate and great rage have temporarily muted our feelings." Many of the animals were shot by the troops when they came onto a dog kennel included German Shepherds and Doberman Pinschers. There were rumors that the Germans had fed these dogs political detainees. Later, American troops drove the German residents of Dachau to assist in burying the dead bodies and to see for themselves the conditions there. The event startled many of the local population, who stated they were ignorant of the years of crimes occurring there. Although the exact count of SS guards slain is unknown now, it is believed to be between 30 and 50. Nobody has ever stood before the court for this reprisal, as General Patton, then military administrator of Bavaria, discounted all the accusations. Nearly 42,000 individuals were killed out of approximately 200,000 persons imprisoned in Dachau and in the several subsidiary camps during its 12 years of operation between 1933 and 1945. We appreciate you watching the World History Channel. Kindly like and subscribe and click the bell notification symbol to avoid missing our upcoming episodes. We will see you next time on the channel.